We will now proceed to the next panel, which is about establishing an endowment fund for building science, technology, and innovation capacity in Africa. For this session, our moderator will be Professor Wole, and I will read a short bio of Professor Wole. He is the current Provost of Worcester Polytechnic Institute in September, rather from September 2018 up to now. Thank you. He focuses his research on biomaterials and mechanical properties of materials. Before that, he also served in the same university, Worcester Polytechnic Institute, as a professor of engineering leadership. He previously served as the president and provost of the African University of Science and Technology in Abuja, Nigeria. This is one of our African host universities. And he's also a recipient of the National Young Investigator Award from the National Science Foundation of the Office of the Naval Research, among other accolades which he has been decorated with. He has many years of experience in research and work in various institutes, including the McDonnell Douglas Research Labs, the Edison Welding Institute, the Ohio State University, and the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He is the author of 4 textbooks and almost 400 peer-reviewed journal papers, and has edited 20 special issues of journals and conference proceedings. Ladies and gentlemen, we welcome the moderator for the session, Professor Wole. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Bonfils. It's a true pleasure to be here and to be part of this really special event. I really want to welcome everybody to this discussion on how to really establish an endowment fund for building STI capacity in Africa. For me, I think it's a great moment for Africa, especially at this time, where we all come to the realization that science, technology, and innovation are the true engines of development. And like many other regions of the world before us, as we look at this opportunity, the first thing to think about is really how do you build a critical mass of human capacity to drive STEM in Africa? And really, it really has to do with a critical mass of about 1,000 scientists per million people that can really drive innovation, that can really drive development across the continent. Africa currently has about 83 scientists per million people. So we need to work out how we build up that critical mass. So obviously, one has to do this in strategic steps. The first is to train the trainers that can train the graduates, that can train the practitioners in a way that is strategic. And so this idea of PASET, to train 1,000 PhDs, is really talking about training the trainers. And as we do that, then we have to enable an environment in which the trainers train people who then can not only teach STEM to really build up that critical mass, but also infuse a culture of innovation into our society. And so within that context, having a research fund and an innovation fund is really critical for the development of science, technology, and innovation across the continent. PASET attempts to do both in developing a sustainable fund for research and innovation and the education of the trainers that would train future generations of Africa in STEM. And it does so in a way that is strategic. As I look at the strategy of focusing on research that addresses our needs in Africa, our needs in energy, in water, in agriculture, food security, these are very much the applications of science that really need an intervention from very strong and stable fundraising that will enable us to have an endowment for science, technology, and innovation in Africa. And so this discussion today about an endowment fund means we don't just do it for a few years. We really think about how we endow these virtues into an African value system and bring on board a partnership that really connects academics to people who have extensive backgrounds in foundations, in banking, who can really come together with us and advise us in ways that we hope will shape the future of an African fund that could sustain the efforts of PASET. And so with that, it's really a delight for me to welcome the participants in this session. Our panelists really bring very diverse perspectives, extensive experience to share with us. They include Dr. Mercy Karanja of the Gates Foundation, Dr. Philip Cotton of the MasterCard Foundation, Mrs. Ndidi Okonkwo-Nwuneli of Sahel, and Mrs. Dora Wurairu of Cooperative Bank. In addition to those participants, we also have contributions from Marcel Mbala Ekobena, a Sloan Fellow at the London Business School, Joel Molel of the African Development Bank, and Dorothy Nyambi from MEDA, the Mennonite Development Association. So very diverse perspectives, and we really look forward to sharing these perspectives. And out of this whole discussion, we hope that we will come out with some insights into how we can move forward in a joint effort between financial experts, between people that manage foundations, to come together with the academics and the African governments to really develop an integrated effort that will lead to a sustainable fund for Africa. The format for this session will be that we will invite the panelists to speak for about 3 to 5 minutes to provide their own individual perspectives. We'll have 4 of the panelists speak, and then we will have comments by 3 of the panelists, some questions from me, and then open questions from the audience. Please put your questions in the question and answer section, and we will try to read them as we go along and respond during this session. So it promises to be an exciting session, and I'd like to start by calling on Dr. Mercy Karanja, Senior Program Officer at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, to say a few words. Dr. Karanja.
Thank you very much. I hope you can all hear me. I am very excited to be part of this program and this very large and timely thinking that we start being very strategic about fundraising. And therefore, I'm excited about the idea of endowment. And indeed, the first important part is a session that was ahead of us of ownership of this fund, because as partners and partners of governments and partners in providing resources to do the work that we do in development, the first thing we look to see is ownership. And ownership of the government provides a very strong incentive for foundations and others to provide the resources needed. So I think this is, as our moderator has said, is timely that we start thinking of resources in the long term, not just in the short term. And I like to say in the foundation and other places, what continues to change is a willingness for the foundation and other donors to listen to our clients and our partners what they need. And I don't believe this has sunk very deeply in our partners when we are doing development because of the old model of, I want to fund this, you better fund it. So mine is really to encourage the government and the universities to be clear what type of funding they need, what type of funding works for them, and have that dialogue. As a foundation, that is the mode of discussion that we encourage. But many times, personally, I feel like we don't take that up. And therefore, we are left thinking that the donors will fund what they want. And this is not true. Donors will not fund what they want. They will fund what our partners want. But that there's still that shyness to say what it is we desire. We as a foundation are very, very keen to support the agenda for the African continent. We are very much in the health and innovation side and development in agriculture and other parts. But the model of funding is what I'm excited about, the model that this innovation fund seeks to establish. Because for a long, long time, Africa in general has only received project funds. And that is why we are always in a mode of fundraising. But when we start thinking of endowment funds and ways that more strategic ways of funding programs, then we can be more strategic and ensure that we are not always starting. And we have supported a very large consortium of universities in Africa in a way that has made progress. But my concern is usually after the project is over, what happens? And that's why I'm excited about the thinking of an endowment fund, because whatever we have done till now has been project funding, 5 years, 7 years. But if us in the continent, and I'm counting myself as one of you in the continent, really be clear about long-term partnerships concerning the things that we do, then Africa and especially our higher education can make progress, not always starting. There were days I remember when our universities were very well funded, and then the funding went down and they all crumbled, a lot of facilities crumbled. Now we are rebuilding in a lot of universities. I said we were supporting a consortium of universities. So I'm very aware of a lot of rebuilding that has to happen, and that will not endure an Africa that is making progress. We need an Africa that's making progress by ensuring that we are building on. And that is why I'm excited that we are thinking about this, an endowment fund. And as donors, we are ready to sit at the table and hear more and exchange more and hear how we want to go. And especially when we are led by the government, I think we stand a very good chance to start even a new way of thinking of funding programs in the continent beyond even universities, so that we can be thinking of longer term and sustainable development. And the other piece I think we need to be more aggressive about is to bring in our private sector so that they can also participate. That is the African private sector need to be at the center of this work, and we need to work a little bit harder. And together we can figure out how we can ensure that we are not just borrowing all over the place, but we are asking the private sector to address some of the areas that are needed in the industry to train relevant graduates who can ensure that they are coming in and accelerating economic growth in the continent. So that combination of private sector, academia, research needs to be tighter even as we do this, so that we can get resources beyond the traditional donors as we know them. Because personally, I do believe there's a lot of resources in Africa that can be tapped if we are targeted and focused in what we desire to achieve. So saying yes, let us figure out how we can do this funding differently, and I hail you for endowment fund, and we'll continue to discuss. I'll leave it at that, and happy to answer questions later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mercy Karanja, for those very insightful comments. At this point, I'd like to call on Mrs. Ndidi Nwoneli to say a few words.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm really honored to be a part of this dynamic session, and I commend the organizers for the vision behind this. Following up on where Dr. Karanja started, I think the vision for an endowment is a laudable one, very forward thinking. So I commend the visionaries behind that, but I would push on a few components that will ensure success. The first is simplified governance. So I happen to sit on a few global and local boards, and I have set up a few endowments myself, and sit on the board of the Africa Philanthropy Forum. And through my work over the last 25 years, strengthening these organizations in Africa, I realized the importance of simplified governance. Nobody will invest in an endowment that doesn't have clear governance structures. Who is in charge? The board of directors should be one entity. We don't need two entities for an endowment fund and for a board of the endowment. When you have multiple entities, it creates confusion. Transparency and accountability is critical, and from day one, the management and the board have to commit to annual reports that are transparent and accountable, regular reporting, communications, and a clear communication strategy on how the endowment is doing and how the endowment is being utilized. And a commitment to only use the returns from the endowment and not to eat into the endowment. And many best practices suggest 5% of the returns used annually, which obviously limits how much we can do in the short term, but allows for long-term sustainability because the endowment has to outlive all of us. So governance, accountability, transparency, and a clear communication strategy is critical. The second thing I would underscore is the importance of fundraising outside the government. And I think Mercy Karanja referred to this. The private sector, family foundations, corporate foundations, all are committed to supporting education and higher education in Africa. And for the issues that you raised, Wole, in your opening remarks, we definitely need a stronger higher education. We need researchers working on the most topical issues. So there is a growing number of homegrown philanthropists in Africa. Now they are committed to supporting initiatives like this and would be open to supporting endowments. But for them to engage, they need to be assured of a couple of things. Number one is, what is the vision for the endowment fund? Who will benefit from it? And how do we hold those who benefit from it accountable to give back? You know, we don't want to train, philanthropists don't want to train the next amazing professors who go to the United States or the UK to contribute to their quota to those economies. And so what commitments and are we holding these PhD students to, and how can we ensure that they stay in our continent and they continue to give back to our continent? How will we measure the impact for every naira, for every shilling, for every rand contributed to this? This is critical. And many organizations actually have almost like a bond. So you're not giving a scholarship, you're giving a loan to these students, and that loan will be forgiven for every year they work in Africa. I think we have to think through that whole cycle of our scholarships to ensure that we can measure impact, because funders, African funders, global funders want to measure impact. And it's not just a few nice stories anymore, it's actually the direct and indirect implications of every amount of money donated. And so for me, that is a critical approach that we have to leverage. And then the final thing is really around collaboration. And I think in our context, there's so many different entities that are working in education, are working in higher education, and the importance of collaboration, knowledge management, sharing, and data is critical. And oftentimes we work in silos. And I love the idea of an endowment fund, but I would really like to encourage everyone behind this to think through systematically how we can partner to address the root causes of the problems that affect our higher education sector. I've been part of initiatives that are focused almost as bandage solutions. And so while this entity is providing the scholarships, another entity is strengthening the institutions to make sure that the PhDs are worth what they are earning, so that when you say you have a PhD from an African university, it's well respected and you command the same amount of rigor as anyone else. And so those partnerships and those collaborations are going to be critical to the sustainability of this endowment, to the success of this endowment, and to the ability to celebrate what we have collectively built. So ultimately, my brothers and sisters, is around governance, around transparency and accountability, financial transparency and accountability, measurement and evaluation from day one, effective communications and storytelling to a wide audience. And I often suggest, monthly e-newsletters, annual reports that are widely publicized. It's going to be about partnerships. It's going to be about strategic philanthropy and fundraising locally, and then holding those who benefit from this accountable so that we can measure impact for generations to come. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ndidi, for those really great comments. Really appreciate your perspectives, and look forward to taking on some questions in this area. At this point, I'd like to call on Professor Philip Cotton of the MasterCard Foundation to say a few words. Philip.
Thank you very much, and Wole, good to see you again, and great to hear Mercy and Ndidi speak. I want to make sure that that I create some resonance and coherence in what has been said. And as you know, at the MasterCard Foundation, we have a scholarship program. We've awarded about 41,000 scholarships at the moment in secondary as well as tertiary, but over the next few years, we'll award an additional 60,000 scholarships in tertiary education alone, with a different scheme for secondary education. Our main thrust is to invest in young people, but we're also investing in universities and collaboratives of universities. And we have indeed set up our first endowment fund in one of our partner universities. We're also investing, as I say, in groups of universities through the University Health Collaborative and the e-learning collaborative, and very soon through a climate change collaborative. Of all of the people that we reach out to, it's important for us that 70% of them are young women, that 25% of them are refugees and IDPs within the continent, and 10% of the young people are people living with disability. And to date, predominantly undergraduate degrees and master's degrees, with most of the young scholars training in Africa, but some training outside Africa. But the principle here is that all roads lead back to Africa. I want to pick up on some of the points that my colleagues have made, just to show that there is some consensus emerging here. And our thrust is really to build resilient institutions. And I want to come back to that after just highlighting three areas. The first is to create resilient learning systems, because we're talking about research here, but without learning and teaching, and learning precedes teaching, of course, and robust and proper assessment systems will not secure the future of academic institutions on the continent and their ability to train people who are ready and prepared for these research opportunities. So resilient learning systems. Also, as Ndidi said, resilient governance systems within universities and institutions, and really pulling out the whole notion of visionary leadership within universities. And of course, finally, predictable financing for universities. And so we want to look at reformed incentive systems for universities and the way in which universities' behaviors are driven. Universities that prioritize ethical leadership, good governance, and equity and inclusion. We want to move to a system, of course, that all of us do, where we're no longer at the mercy of rather random attempts to secure funding for PhDs, an opportunistic approach that is at the mercy of handouts almost, because that tears apart our strategy for the African continent and our strategy within universities, and it tears the soul out of the future of academic excellence on the continent. And so endowments, giving self-reliance to universities is actually key and critical. It's also important that we think about who would host these endowments, who would host the funds, to ensure that there are reasonable management and investment costs associated with these funds, but also building on Mercy and Ndidi, to make sure that we continue to build resilient institutions. How are we going to do this? Endowment funds. I think somebody else wants to.
Could you please mute if you're not speaking? Thanks, Philip. Please go ahead.
They clearly have something more important than I have to say. I'm happy to wait, Wole. I'll continue, though. Yeah. I want to make sure, and we all want to make sure, that ultimately we build resilient institutions.
My apology.
That's okay.
My apology for disturbing the meeting. This is an interpreter. This is a Portuguese interpreter that is facing technical problem, and the host is not assisting.
Okay.
I'm actually waiting to be assigned. My colleague, he's actually tired of speaking on his own, and I'm asking the host to reassign me. I think he's failing to do so.
Okay, the point's well taken. All right, please continue, Philip.
Yeah, I just want to wrap up very quickly just by saying, as we build resilient institutions and we think about this endowment fund, and we look at how many institutions on the African continent have experience of hosting endowment funds within their own institutions, we really need to consider building the capacity of universities to host endowments, making sure that we have the right regulatory and governance systems in place within those universities. So we really create a learning network for universities in terms of the endowment that might ultimately be hosted by PASET, but sharing some of that learning with institutions. Thank you very much indeed, Wole.
It's great. Thank you so much, Philip. Thanks for your patience as well. Much appreciated your comments and your insights. Our next panelist is Mrs. Dora Waruiru, who's the head of the Foundation of Cooperative Bank. Mrs. Waruiru.
Good afternoon,
Please.
everyone. Thank you for having me. I bring a slightly different perspective from the private sector. Cooperative Bank Foundation is owned 100% by Cooperative Bank. And the foundation was formed with a flagship program of education scholarships that's proved to be quite successful. And so I was asked to share our model. Our model is that of creating shared value, where we look at the intersection between social needs, business opportunities, and corporate assets. And although the name has evolved recently as shared value, I think ours just was accidental, but it's been successful. And what this bank did is it began by having a very deep stakeholder engagement, where it looked at one major stakeholder in the bank, who is the cooperative movement. Now, Kenya has the most successful cooperative movement in Africa, and we bank over 11,000 cooperatives with a membership of about 16 million people, members in cooperatives. And so the bank decided to do a flagship education scholarship based on the fact that the most taken loan across the financial services was for education. You'd find coffee farmers, fish farming, whoever was a cooperative member, the most taken loan in this country was education. So we decided to start with an education scholarship program that would support this and help those members who, for instance, one parent had died or they both have died and the children are struggling to school and they are clever. So our model, first of all, of why the first circle there is corporate assets and expertise, is to say that don't shy away when forming this endowment fund, don't shy away from looking at the private sector, because the different tax regimes in this continent have benefits and incentives for giving by private sector companies. So for instance, in Kenya, 3% of the total revenue of any private sector company, 3% is exempt from tax. So it meant that we were actually benefiting by giving away. And so even as RSIF approaches and considers how to fundraise, don't shy away from looking at the tax regimes in each African country, because it's actually an incentive for them to give to social needs like scholarships. So for instance, in that little diagram there, the corporate assets is that the bank then gains by giving scholarships, by getting tax exemption on a certain percentage. The second circle there is business opportunities. Engage seriously before you form this fund and look at, in your stakeholder engagement, which businesses will benefit from coming and joining with you in this game. And for us, we decided to isolate the whole process of the selection of these students, which is major. Outside donors will come and ask you, what is your selection process like? But we isolated it for our cooperative delegates. And so you find what it has done over the years is brought so much loyalty from the cooperative delegates, because you can imagine keeping together this large number of people together in one umbrella of owning 60%, 66% of this bank. The loyalty that has been born out of giving them the selection part of the scholarship, and the numbers are huge. So you find during the selection period of the scholarship, the delegates spread out and go deep into the interior of this country and bring out the very needy but bright children. And so the success factor has been that we have brought children to university and to high school who would otherwise have never even seen normal media channels of advertising for scholarships, because of the use of cooperative delegates who then continue to bank with us. So the business opportunities continue for us and are enhanced. And the last circle there is the social needs. That one would be represented very easily by the fact that the students who will be getting the PhD scholarships will benefit because they wouldn't have otherwise afforded it. So look at, when you're forming the RSIF endowment fund, look at actually creating shared value right across your stakeholders, and you'll find that the fundraising will get easier and easier because they will buy in easier. And so how to create this shared value is quite simplistic, actually. Have a very, very intense stakeholder engagement. Look at the values of these stakeholders and seek a strategy that makes the key stakeholders proud. You should just see the cooperative delegates in the various villages during selection time. Oh, they are proud of what they're doing. They're proud to be associated with us. They tell us of even places where we can get more local funding because it gives them joy. And develop a flagship program, which, although it seems clear right now, I would say develop a flagship program that encourages synergies, includes partnerships and collision of actors, Include also some interesting thematic areas that are transversal, that fall under more than one priority area, in that even if you detail the levels of research and science that you're looking at expanding into, they will include more people getting into your basket. And so broaden your definition of fundraising and embrace some innovative tactics. And most of all, ensure you measure the progress and impact and tell your story well. And leave some room to keep adapting. Like with the digital era, things are adapting so fast that in your channels of fundraising and how you go about your things, keep some room to adapt to these evolving circumstances. So thank you.
Wow, thank you very much, Mrs. Waruiru, for bringing very different perspectives that are informed by the real world. Really appreciated those comments. Before we go on, I just want to use this opportunity to ask four initial panelists, if you were to think of how we could bring together the different comments and suggestions into one integrated effort that is informed by your approaches. What are your sort of specific recommendations in doing, developing a clear fund that's linked to the PASET board in a way that really has built in the governance that we want and the connections to community? I just want each one of you, if you can, just to give one or two insights from your perspective on what the structure of such a fund could be and what the governance could be, and potentially how do we really connect these to our communities across the continent. I'll start with Dr. Mercy Karanja. Please go ahead. Are you there? Doesn't sound like she is. You're muted.
Okay, you can hear me now.
Yeah.
Okay, great. As our last panelist has said, participation is key. Participation of all that we need to bring at the table, and I think everybody has talked about this. Ensure that the people you are targeting, the universities, the people you are targeting for fundraising also are part of an advisory team in a way. And this is how you collect a lot more information. The private sector, the foundations, the governments, advisory boards, extending it a little bit beyond the governing body, which is very important, but an advisory board that can intentionally bring new ideas and strategic partnerships that are key. Everybody, as the last speaker said, wants to feel that they are part of a big thing and a part of a nice thing that is going on. That is one, participation of all that are included. And that very grassroots thinking, I think, is one of my favorites of ensuring that we are reaching what is actually needed. There's a lot of theory sometimes. All of us who are in development know that. We have a lot of ideas of what is needed, but being very thorough and going through what is it that we need. For example, I was talking to African Development Bank and they were giving our country some money to build roads. What are the skills that we need in the country to do those kind of projects so that we are not always contracting? We are training and yet we are contracting outsiders. It doesn't add up. So how do we train for the areas that we actually need in our country? And I think this is an area that has been dragged behind for a very long time. Ensure that we connect the needs of the country on our economic sectors to the training. that is so urgent in the continent. That is what led us as a foundation to support universities, because there was that lag of going on training the traditional staff that has, the private sector has gone ahead and they are doing different things. So that matching of the current needs, the current requirements of the industry and what we are training is so needed right now. So let us try to be more thorough in finding out what the economic sectors need, the different ones need, and be more open to include new ideas, new skill sets that we haven't been training for a long time, and bring management issues into all our training, because that also is a piece that lacks a lot in the content. I say as a foundation person who has really had difficulties, even as we want to give money and we don't have these very foundational skills, even as we train for the hardcore science and for hardcore technology. Let's have those foundation skills that will make our graduates able to be problem solvers. And I'll stop it there. It's a topic I can go on and on so that we are able to.
Okay, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Over to you.
All right, Mrs. Ndidi Nwoneli.
Thank you so much. I really commend all the panelists and I agree with them completely. If I had to add one issue, it's to come back to this governance issue. I think Dora described a very efficient structure, but it's obviously one private company. In our context, it's a lot more complex, right? And so what I would suggest is from the governance structure to have a board that represents not only the private sector, the government, civil society, but even some of the alumni of our scholarship programs. Make sure that that board rotates. You need new blood. So every 3 years, renewable for a second term. So you continue to infuse the board with that new blood, the insights, and engage the community. I also think this endowment board can have some committees which have outsiders who don't necessarily sit on the board, and the committees can have advisors from academia, from civil society, from areas of growth and innovation to ensure that the board has the latest thinking, but they will not have a fiduciary responsibility. They're just more like advisors, and they can convene informally twice a year just to infuse the energy and the commitment into the board. The ability to refresh our board, to hold them accountable, and to keep it lean and responsive is going to be the crux of this. The second thing I just want to underscore is the importance of M&E. We can have a very, very bold vision. I said this earlier, but unless that vision is tied to clear matrix that we're going to hold ourselves accountable for, we're not going to attract the long-term funding that we require. And there are lots of great initiatives on our continent that have leveraged M&E. And I think one example we can look to that has been a fundraising machine is both Ashesi University and ALA. They've done a really good job raising money, Africa Leadership Academy and Ashesi in Ghana. And they've proven that private entities can raise local and external funding on our continent quite successfully. And then finally, I want to offer the support of the Africa Philanthropy Forum. I sit on the board, and it's made up of very committed foundations, corporate and private foundations, and we would be very interested in supporting this and providing additional insights as you build your endowment and as you scale. So congratulations once again, and I look forward to celebrating your successes in future years.
Thank you very much, Ndidi. Philip Cotton.
Thanks very much, Wole. I echo what Mercy and Ndidi have said, and so I'm not going to repeat what they've said, but I certainly would if I was in other company with more time, because what they've said is completely right in my mind, and really delighted that the examples of Ashesi and ALU are out there, that they're indeed part of our partnership network. And again, I come back to visionary leadership. I want to pick up though, Wole, just on what Prof. Aminata said, and it's always a delight to hear her speak. And that is just to think about, as Ndidi said and Mercy have said, the fund would have some strategy around research, but it would need to have an adaptive fund, a fund that could be turned around very quickly to respond to immediate needs. And one of those immediate needs at the moment is building the workforce around vaccine manufacturing, and certainly around drugs manufacturing, so that we could very, very quickly turn around curricula and programs with the aid of this fund to support manufacturing in the fastest amount of time possible. And that's to look at the full panoply of people who would need to be involved in that. But that again would be the role of these participation groups, the councils, the advisory boards, and all down to absolutely exquisite governance. So thank you very much, Wole.
Great, thank you so much, Philip. Mrs. Waruiru, any final comments here before we?
Just to add, yes, thank you. Just to add that the world of academia can be a bit far-fetched sometimes. And I think it will be important to identify core values that will cause those scholarships to be adapted locally and in the communities, and so that core value becomes ingrained even in the scholars. And much as I've said this before, I think the whole idea of the cooperative movement in Kenya was our core value, to keep it intact and to keep it growing. And the fund needs to identify that, so that then people actually engage, people buy in and push it further. That would be my comment.
Great, thank you very much for those insights. At this point, I'd like to call on Mr. Joel Quebec-Molel from the African Development Bank to make a few comments. Mr. Molel?
Yeah, thank you, Wole. I hope you can hear me.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Trying to put on a video. Sorry, I can't see myself. Anyway.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. Thank you very much, and I'm really.
You might want to adjust it so we can see more than the first half of your head. Just
sorry, I can't. All right. Yes.
Move your screen. There you go.
Sorry, I couldn't see myself. Good morning and good afternoon or good evening, wherever you are. I'm speaking from United States at the moment, and it's very early in the morning, at 8. I don't have so much remarks to make at this point in time. What I just wanted to say is that we have had some discussions and on PASET RSIF, and one of the things that we noticed was the fact that this is really, really timely, and it's something which at the African Development Bank we are also looking at how we can support the human development. If you look at the, and perhaps many might understand the role of multilateral development banks, which African Development Bank is one of them. There are a couple of them. There are around 7 biggest ones in the world. That their support to education is, to be honest, is very small. It's some research indicates that it's about 0.4 to 0. Or something like that. It's quite low in terms of education. But I mean, what I'm trying to speak to is how, the role of development banks, especially in education and more so in research, and that within the African Development Bank, we are seeking to change this. We are seeking to change this because we realize the importance of human development capital, especially in Africa. I mean, look at the statistics of how much research is contributing. I don't want to go into details of that because, everyone knows how many researchers we have, how many how much research we are output in Africa is. And I like what one of the panelists talked about in terms of what we need to do. I mean, yes, I think we need to look forward in terms of what do we need to do to change this situation. And I mean, the PASET, this endowment fund is really, really very important. What I wanted to say also is that the African Development Bank does not have an endowment fund at the moment. We have not developed one, but we are looking at together with the African Union and another development banks how we can do that. So this is something which is in the works. We have not reached a point where we've developed one, but I would assure you that once we have some headway, then I would want to see that some collaboration, and so that we don't duplicate effort, we do it in a way that it is more effective and it can work together with PASIF. So I don't have much more remarks at this point in time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joel. Yeah, appreciate you tuning in from the US as well. Next, I'd like to call on Marcel Mbala Ekobena from the London Business School. Marcel, are you there?
Well, hi. Thank you, everyone. And again, congratulations for making it so far. The hardest thing for me to do is to be one of the last people to speak and have to say something new when so many brilliant people have gone before me. So I'll try something slightly different. In the sense that the way I'm approaching this is more from a financial perspective, tapping into my own experience across the continent, but also tapping into where the world is going today. If I look at sort of key words from everyone who's spoken before me, Mercy did talk about ownership. Indeed, he talked about vision and governance. Philip effectively assured us that in a way, that there is an emerging consensus. And Dora did flag corporate assets as a leading vector for to see this fund come together. The great question, if I go back to all the discussions that have happened, has been effectively to wonder whether you start by sort of talking to people and then come up with a fund, or you come up with a fund and then you talk to people to put money into it. I have to say this is a fantastic place to be for PASET and all the stakeholders, because there is a will, and if there's anything that enforces that, is all the stakeholders that we have today around the table. So in thinking about this, I'd like to flag that perhaps this is not just exciting times, but times to roar and to move ahead. There is readiness. There is a clear need to redefine returns, not just from a fund perspective, but also from a stakeholders perspective. What we've heard talks about long-term returns, but also if you think about it, countries like Brazil or Iraq and many others in the 70s did invest heavily in higher education. As a matter of fact, Brazil was the first, if my memory is not wrong, Southern Hemisphere country to actually build commercial aircrafts. So the global agenda, so that's an important point to make. So today, what we're looking at is that the global agenda has never been more inclusive, especially post COP26. There is a common need to save the planet effectively, but also there is a common sense of ownership and also accepting local nuances and local needs. That puts us African, that puts an institution like the one we're talking to today, or a possibility like the one we're talking about today, at the forefront of how we have to redefine or can redefine the future. So effectively, there is something in it for everyone. The great news about this is that as if I were to sit here as a financial professional or an investor or an investment manager, I would almost feel that the mandate is clear, is more about those behind the mandates that have to make it a much leaner process to get to the mandate and to get to the fund and to get it working. It is an absolute honor for me to be part of a conversation that thinks about not my children or my children's children, but their grandchildren, and the ability to see, or to at least expect that their lives will be made a lot more sustainable by the decisions we're making today. It's great that we don't have to, that we are borrowing today to actually fund the future and not the other way around. I'll stop there.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much, Marcel, for your comments and providing a financial perspective for us as well. And next, I'd like to call on Ms. Dorothy Nyambi, who is the President and CEO of MEDA.
Okay. Wow, thank you so much, Wole, and I just want to thank the PASET team, and I'm going last, and just like Marcel said, there's no need to repeat everything, the insightful contribution that has already been made, but I just want to touch on two things. First, to again just thank Professor Aminata Diallo for her leadership. And when we talk about 1,000 PhDs, I think the one piece I want to add to this conversation is, what are we going to do to make sure that these PhDs are relevant to the grand challenges of the continent? Because I want to tie it back to an endowment fund, because I come from an organization that has been doing investment work for more than 60 years around the world. And what is really going, I think, to make this stand out is that ability of those 1,000 PhDs and more to be able to actually do things on the continent that will move the needle forward. So I think for me, that's one piece about that relevance, that connectivity, that we need to make sure that it is there. The second thing that I want to just add is the need for a mindset shift when it comes to education as a viable business opportunity for all stakeholders, for everybody who is going to, bring shared value to this particular initiative. And I say so because, for the private sector to come in, and I did hear the examples of the African Leadership University of Ashesi. How do we make sure that those institutions that are already testing some of these models are able to put out, what they are learning, so that many more, the continent needs many more of those kinds of institutions and sources of funding to make sure that we can actually bring systems change, to the continent in education. And I think for me, the last thing that I want to just emphasize is something that Ndidi said. And whilst we make sure that our students are 1,000 PhDs, they're relevant, they're well-trained and everything, I think it is so important that the collateral parts of the system are also strengthened, so that the value and the validity of our graduates, our programs, are going to really be valued across the continent. So I won't touch much more again about the endowment fund. I think it is a green fund, it's sustainable. The timing is right. We cannot continue to have aid that is given to us, on the continent for our education. We now need to build this green fund that, as Ndidi said, if we were to look at 5% of annual returns to be used for the program, how do we make sure that the endowment fund is a $500 billion fund, so that 5% can go a long way to get some great work done. So I'll stop right there so that maybe the audience has some chance to ask some questions. So thank you for inviting me, and excellent and good luck to this initiative.
Thank you, Dorothy, for those great comments. Really appreciate your perspectives as well. At this point, I would like to open up the conversation to the audience. If you would like to ask a question, please raise your hand. I hope I can see you here. There we go. Anyone want to start off with a question?
Sorry, Professor Wole, Boniface here, the MC. The participants cannot ask questions, but they post questions in the Q&A.
Okay. Okay.
Because this is a webinar, Zoom webinar. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Boniface. So I'm just going to go through some of the questions here. So the first one, thanking all the speakers. How can Africans self-define their problem and develop a science, technology, and innovation that reflects the needs of the African people? So I guess, can I perhaps call on Dr. Mercy Karanja and Ms. Dora Warairu to take those questions, this first question.
Okay, you can hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. That's an excellent question, and that's exactly what we need to figure out. Where does the continent need to go? Philip talked about vaccine manufacture. We have a long way to go in a lot of the sectors of the economy. So being very clear, what is the urgent, what is the long-term, and drawing our own path of where we need to go is so important. And I alluded to earlier of being forward-looking, not only learning about the things that are past and keeping to past things, but how can we be more forward-looking and looking at what our continent needs from where we are, so that we are training petroleum engineers, we are training areas where we don't have the kind of skills that we need in the continent. We have a lot of fuel, for example. We have a lot of crude oil. How many engineers do we have who can actually work in these sectors? We have to outsource a lot of skills to do most of the highly economic areas of our economy. And this is what we are talking about. Let us interrogate what is it that we actually need, other than continue with the old model. And that can be done very much in that stakeholder collaboration we talked about earlier with the private sector, the people who are investing. The people who are investing really understand where the skills are lacking. So bringing people in the private sector in particular to say, in the IT revolution, what is it that we are lacking now, for example? What is it that we need to be looking forward to training? And we aspire even to start our own aircraft, as somebody said. Do we aspire? What are our aspirations? I think that's what we are talking about, what we aspire to be as a continent, so that we can have those conversations and really train not only for the now, but for the future that we desire. So consultation, 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 and finding out what is that will take us from where we are to where we need to be in different sectors of our economy. Over.
Okay, thank you. Mrs. Dora?
RSIF wants to also focus on innovation, and innovation is about offering solutions to problems. So I would say that both the General Fund and the endowment begin to really focus on understanding the problems that Africa has, and then align the areas for scholarships, for research, for scientific work, to be focused on those problems that we are experiencing and offer solutions to them. So I think this is the right platform to really solve those problems and challenges if they remain innovative. I always say that when I was growing up, ripe bananas were seasonal, but we have an agricultural research institute that has studied bananas in Kenya, and now bananas are all year round. So let us hope that RSIF will focus on the problems and really do research and align our solutions to them.
Thank you. You know, and in all fairness to PASET, and I'm sure some of the PASET organizers will reinforce this, PASET is really focused on applied research that addresses problems of energy, problems of food security, water, communications in a very focused way. And I think we're at the beginning stages of a new era where hopefully we can really build critical mass of efforts in areas that address our needs in Africa. So these are really welcome comments. So the next question is by Jamando, who talks about scholars that have finished their studies and how we're working on technology transfer to members of the country and going beyond the papers. I don't know if anyone from PASET wants to talk about the innovation funds that are being issued to enable scholars to transition from the initial ideas. Moses, so is this an opportunity for you to say a few words?
Yes, please. Thank you very much, Moderator, Prof. Wole. Yeah, first, I think specifically to the question, I think the selection of scholars, sorry, I can't turn on my video, so I'll just continue. The selection of scholars itself is, and the whole program is oriented with that in mind. So first of all, the selection, we're looking at PhD applicants who come from research institutions and universities in Africa to support them to upgrade their credentials and their skills. And so that in itself, of course, ensures that they have a place to go. They have a very specific vision and needs in terms of the training that also is relevant and contributes to the agenda of the country at large. But I think also more specifically, we also offer specific windows, one of which is a postdoc grant. So as we come towards the first cohort that's about to finish, we have a pot of money that's available for those postdocs to go back to their home institutions and undertake research. And some of this is built on experiences and best practices from previous programs, such as, for example, the Rocky Doc program of the Rockefeller Foundation, which highlight the need to provide funding to allow these bright students who come back to settle down into their home institutions. And part of that, of course, is the research that they're doing, which is linked to the technology that you're asking about. Chair, if you allow me to make one quick comment also while I have the floor. Sure. To highlight that, first of all, to thank all the panelists for very, very useful input to us. We are very grateful, and I think a lot of reflection further reflection is going to be done. The program itself is young, and I think this is an excellent time to get this this input. I think the governments who set up the program have really looked at a lot of the key issues. And RSIF has been created as a long-term kind of holistic solution. And someone talked about the need to focus on root causes. So the issues of the quality of higher education, excellence in doctoral training, looking also at moving research to innovation so that universities are not just doing research, but actually ensuring that their research on knowledge contributes towards social as well as for profit making. So if a robust feasibility study was done as part of this, this work towards the endowment, but I think the input that we have received today is excellent. And we wish to thank all of you for that input. And I think we'll be reflecting of that, including some of the issues raised as the transversal thematics, also linking to this need for an adaptive fund. And I think Philip talked about the vaccine and drug manufacturing. I think previously the PASET CAG has talked about things like COVID more broadly, but I think this targets it a bit more field. So I think we just wish to thank you, and we will be looking forward to having a fund that will move that needle, and really request for your continued input and engagement as we have those discussions. Chair, back over to you.
It's great. Thank you, Moses. Just two quick questions. One for Philip Cotton about the MasterCard Foundation collaborating with universities directly. Philip?
Yes, I'm sorry, I can't read the.
Okay, so the question is, does the MasterCard Foundation collaborate with universities directly or only through organizations like PASET?
Oh, right. Oh, no, thanks. No, I saw that comment earlier. No, most of our collaborations are with universities directly. And there's a list of universities that can be made available at the moment, about 29 universities that we have scholarship programs with. But we also work through other partners to ensure that young people have access to education. So in secondary education, we'd work with BRAC and CAMFED and FAWE. In tertiary education, we tend to work directly with universities like Makerere, like University of Rwanda, like University of Cape Town, University of Pretoria, and such like. Thanks, Juan.
That's great. Thank you. Last question from Professor Golam. It's a question for Joel Molel, saying it's about the Knowledge and Capacity Development Trust Fund. Is it possible for the ADB to work with the RSIF in establishing the endowment fund for the RSIF? Mr. Molel?
Yes, thank you. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, so what I want to say is that we have had discussions with PASET. In fact, when they were doing that robust research in terms of how to establish and what they needed to do, we did contribute. We had some discussions. But going forward, in terms of how, if African Development Bank is thinking of another endowment fund, how can we work with PASET? Yes, I mentioned that in the sense that we are thinking around those lines as well. And part of the reason is because as an MDB, that is multilateral development bank, part of our strategy is to invest in human development capital, yes. So, and as I said before, when you look at all MDBs, it's actually low in terms of how much they've put into education, and more so into higher education. When you talk about PhD research and things like that, it's actually low, but that's changing. And we're thinking of collaborating very well with many others. There is a fund called IFED, IFFED, which is a fund which is being developed. I think last year, because of COVID, the thing slowed down, but that is being developed by several MDBs. If you could go to the site on Google, there are others which are also focusing on different aspects of education. We are thinking in African Development Bank of working together, because the idea is we don't want also at the end of the day to duplicate effort. We you know, put resources and investments where it's clearly needed and it's necessary. And I will give you this example of last year's COVID exposed a lot of things around Africa in terms of our health systems. Vaccines, for example, we all know how much Africa contributes in terms of vaccine being manufactured in Africa is just 1%, and that's done in only one country, Senegal. And African Development Bank is currently working with others to see that is changed. So this is part of that collaboration I'm talking about in terms of Africa-wide kind of collaboration to do it. And we are working also with African Union as well, because look at it from also the policy side of it. Who drives that? It is governments. And how do we work with governments? Part of it to work uniformly kind of is through African Union. So we are working closely together. That's what I would say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Molel. And with that, I'd like to bring this session to a close. But before I do so, I want to thank all the speakers, all the panelists, and all the contributors. It has been most stimulating. And for me, there's one message, which is we must all form a team that includes all the different stakeholders that will really establish this fund as a knowledge fund for really supporting all the elements of science, technology, and innovation that could really develop and transform Africa. I also would like to recommend that we invite the members of this group to be part of an advisory team to really advise the RSIF on the way forward in establishing and strengthening and securing an endowment for science, technology, and innovation in Africa.